When I'm painting by myself, generally I have headphones on, really loud music, a vodka soda. Today I wanted to create sort of a landscape, but something more contemporary, a little bit modern, almost with an ombre effect, and it's really, really simple. So the first thing we're going to start with is our large canvas. Now, this canvas is a 2x3 foot. You get them pre-stretched. Any art supply store, you can go as large or as small as you want for this project. Then we're ready to draw on our landscape. And again, with this, you got to think of rolling hills, and we don't want to be perfect, and you don't want to be exact. With your pencil, we're going to just start to very roughly figure out where our trees are going to go. And you can see here, these don't look like trees. They don't look like anything. They're just giving us a rough idea of where maybe that hill might be. And I think the less precise you are, the better it's going to be. Be really, really jagged about it. And here we'll just keep some hills going in there maybe, and they're going to be lightened out. And then maybe here in the foreground, there'll be some taller ones. And again, this is only a suggestion that we're doing. We're not actually maybe even going to follow this. We could do something completely different, but at least it's going to sort of set the tone for where we want to go. So now we need to mix our ink. We're going to be using a series of inks to create almost like a dark, dark green. We want like almost an indigo green. And the reason we want to use the ink is because we're going to apply a lot of water, and we're going to be doing a lot of ombre effects. And we want to build up layers instead of like acrylic paint where you paint it and it's opaque. We want the inks to be really, really translucent and add layers. And you'll see as we kind of go along how we're going to add layers and take layers back. So I'm mixing a green, a turquoise. I'm putting a few shots of burnt umber in. And maybe a few hits of black. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create our master jar, if you will, of the darkest color, and then we can work back from there. So I would say probably we're going to need about 1/3 of a cup or so that we're going to have enough. And then again, we want to keep testing it for the right color. Visualize sort of misty mountains, although that's not a color. We just sort of made that up. Yeah, see there's sort of a lot of blue in there. I think we might be good to go. So from here, we're going to need some rags, some water bottles. So what we're going to do first is up here, we're just going to apply a really light green. We're almost going to activate the canvas so it looks like the hills on the furthest distance. So we don't really want anything too dark. And if it gets too dark, then by all means, we can just start brushing it off. So the background, the furthest sort of sky in the distance, as you can see, it's just literally scrubbing in the ink and then scrubbing it off with a towel. We almost don't want any color in the back, but we don't want just sort of a blank white canvas. So, and at this part here, you don't have to be by any means perfect about it. Okay. Cool. Okay, now we can get into our first sort of, I guess, tree line sort of valley here. So from this, we're going to get a thinner brush. When you go by your brushes, make sure that your brushes are stiff enough and they're not too soft, because the softer the brush is just going to sort of give us muted trees. We still want to have a nice crisp line. So get these stiffer ones. Again, they're really inexpensive. They're like $2 for a good brush like that. So what we want to do is we just want to get a little bit of dimension here. Again, you got to think, because we're going to do the ombre, right? So it's going to be sort of the tones of one color. So this is our lightest color, and then we're going to slowly start to add depth. This being sort of the darkest color down here. So this we want to be really, really light. And again, we sort of want trees. So our trees they're sort of evergreen trees. So they have little peaks that kind of go up and little zigzag things. And again, we really don't have to be perfect about it. And again, you can hear it on the canvas. It's a really stiff brush, and you want to almost scrub it in. And then where the hill's sort of coming, what we're going to do is we're going to then just take it and we're going to soften that and bring it down. Now with this, we can always activate it with water, and because the ink will never fully stain the canvas, you can see here, if there's a portion you don't like, you can literally just erase it. So as the ink is still wet and active, we can really push it around a lot. So again, this whole thing's supposed to be like misty and moody, so it doesn't have to be perfect off the top. Again, this is like a modern interpretation of this, so don't think something's right or wrong. Because at this point, I don't know what's right or wrong with it. You just keep it moving. I like this kind of painting because, to be honest with you, the nice thing is that there's no real end result. It's just sort of what happens, happens. And again, this is going to be your interpretation of it, right? So it doesn't have, people don't have to say, oh, hey, that looks like a flower pot, or hey, that looks like a building. You know, this is sort of our interpretation of a landscape. So I think if we just kind of get the idea of rolling hills, it's going to come across. And if it looks like something else, then tell everyone it's something else. With this kind of thing too, you might want to even have as reference a picture of, say, rolling hills or something, so you can kind of get the feeling of where you want to go in different levels and valleys. That might be helpful. When I was a little kid, my room was always the worst. Anytime company came over, my mom had to always run up and close my door because my floor was full of paint spills and glue, and she would just leave it because she'd try and clean it up, and I would just come back the next day and spill another tin of paint. So I really had a horrible, disgusting room, but I absolutely loved it because it was a total free-for-all. And even washing my brushes on clothes, I find it quicker when you're painting. Instead of trying to look for a rag, just make sure you're just wearing dirty clothes so that you can just clean your brushes. It's a lot quicker, I find, than reaching for a rag. And don't worry about it, your hands are going to get dirty, but that's part of the passion. With this process here, this is sort of where you are going to kind of keep going back and forth and back and forth. And build up those intricate layers. I kind of find this therapeutic because it's just sort of, it's really soft, and you're just kind of almost doing the same repetitive motions. And you don't really have to think about anything. I love painting at night. I think it's kind of cool when you're painting at night, everyone else is asleep, and you're kind of doing your thing. It's almost therapeutic in a sense. just trying to find out now where the next level is going to come from, possibly in here. So what I could even do is maybe I can just, with a quick little line, maybe come into here. So maybe I'll do sort of a tree-lined little hill coming in here. You can see everything almost has the same tone right now, which is cool. But at least we're kind of getting levels of valleys of things. And then we can go back into it and darken the foreground and give it some sort of dimension. This is the kind of painting as well, because we're just using one color ink and we're just on a raw canvas, you can leave this for a day, or it's not something that you have to commit yourself to once you started. You can sort of go away, leave it if you get frustrated, and then 2 days later come back. Or, if you're cooking dinner and you're in the middle of something, just activate it again with water and then scrub it out. And even if you really don't like something, just spray it down and get a rag or get a stiff brush, like one of these just painter brushes, and then just scrub it out. So don't feel like you've ever you got to stop or you ruined something or you can't go backwards. Because, like I said, we're on that primed canvas, we can always go back into it. A lot of times for me, the paintings, they're kind of never done. And that's the cool thing. You keep going back into it. Yeah, as you get towards the bottom, you kind of sort of find your last, your foreground, I should say. And I kind of feel now that it's time to maybe bring in some of the depth of color. And what I've done is I've gone back to my original jar of ink, the really intense one, and then go back into it. Again, you can see how little ink we've used on this, because you don't need a lot. The cool thing with this is when you're, because we're painting a landscape and we're talking about horizons, so when you're spraying it, the natural gravity of the water pulling it down kind of gives it this feeling of like trees. So that vertical pull is kind of nice. The stuff that you're using in the foreground here, this will primarily be the darkest color, because you kind of want all the darker colors to sort of advance. It's slowly going back into like this white of mist. And we want everything to be kind of misty. That's where you got to kind of take your time and just kind of go back and forth and use the spray bottle to kind of diffuse things. Because we want all blurred edges and blurred lines, nothing too obvious. Because again, this is sort of a modern version of, or contemporary version of landscape, as opposed to traditional landscapes with details and trees and clouds and babbling brooks. The thing with this painting is once you sort of have your landscape sort of figured out, you really want to kind of keep going back into it, back forth. We want to sort of build up slow layers. If we went right into this with a dark color, it's harder to go back. It's easier to sort of build. So that's what we're going to do for this, is layer the color on top of each other. This painting kind of reminds me of when I was in the Golden Triangle in Thailand. In Chiang Mai, there was sort of these rolling hills, and every single morning it was thick jungle, and you just sort of had these misty sort of shapes. And it kind of had this kind of feeling. And it was just sort of these greens and blues and grays. And it was really quite haunting. It was fantastic. And it was just basically the steam of the forest coming off as the sun was rising. So that's the kind of the feeling that we want. You could never really pick out, hey, that's a tree or that's a that. It was just sort of these shapes and these interpretations of hills. And I think that's sort of where we want to go with this. I'm just kind of feeling now that it's feeling a bit flat, but I think maybe I want a deeper or a different shade of this same color. So I may be mixing up some colors. I'm not sure yet. And that's the whole thing when you're painting. You're exploring it with it. You can kind of see it's really cool. You can kind of create awesome texture with just a rag by spraying water on it. And then it kind of just does its own thing. As you're sort of painting and working it, if you add something in, and now it's affecting everything else, so it's like a domino effect. It's like cooking, right? It's like a recipe. Oh, look, I added too much salt, so now we need to adjust and add potatoes to take away the salt. So this is the same kind of thing. So as soon as you maybe add a layer and it's feeling a little dark, now I've got to darken this, or I've got to lighten that, or lighten that. Again, don't sort of think in your head that once it's done, because it's not. It's going to keep moving. That's why I keep going all over the place, because certain things are reacting in different ways and sort of pushing me in different directions. That's why I like doing this on canvas, as opposed to trying to do this on paper. When you're doing watercolor on paper, or using inks on paper, it's a lot more permanent because the paper that you're using is a rag paper, and it soaks in the ink immediately. And it's harder to sort of go back, whereas because this is a gessoed canvas, the ink is still kind of just floating on the top. It never really soaks in to the canvas, so you're sort of allowed to sort of go back and forth a lot more. You could certainly try this on paper. It would be, I just think, Emaya's a little different journey, a lot more difficult. With this type of painting, you can choose any color. You could do this in blues and grays, and maybe purples and mauves or whatever, because again, this sort of like rolling landscape on different weather conditions and light conditions could be virtually any color. So don't feel that you have to go into these greens. The one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to match your colors to your sofa. So I'm not going to buy a green sofa to pick up on these colors. Art should complement your space and tell a story, but it doesn't necessarily, and I don't really feel that it needs to match your space. That's why you have fabrics and wall color. That's what they do. Their job is to tie the room together. Art is to sort of stand out and complement a space. You can use these big brushes here, which are great. It's almost dry, really, really lightly damp, to sort of scrub and blend. A lot of times when you use the mist bottle, you start to get a lot of drips, so we don't want to soak the canvas. But then there are just some areas that look a bit scrubby, and we want to just sort of soften them out. People always get intimidated by painting and sort of, number one, seeing a white canvas, and with the type of brushes, and and you don't need to, number one, spend a lot of money. Canvases, pre-stretched canvases, are quite affordable, and the brushes and the materials you're using, the ink is just a few dollars a bottle, and these are just regular house paint brushes. And these small ones that I get from the art supply store are just synthetic stiff brushes. By no means you know, expensive squirrel hair and things like that. I mean, I've got specialty brushes like this one here, which is a badger hair brush, which is quite expensive, but it's used for blending and softening, which we certainly don't need on this because we're just using water. But these are more for faux finishes like creating marble. So, I mean, if you are going to invest in great brushes, you take care of them and you use them for the purpose that they're intended to. I also have some really expensive soft brushes like these ones, which are all real fur. So I'm certainly not going to scrub into a painting. I'm just going to damage and crack all the bristles. So for this sort of scrubby work that I call it, I'm just going to use synthetic brushes, and they're going to wear down, they're going to break down, and when they do, you toss them and you get new ones. So you don't have to be intimidated by getting really expensive materials. So at the bottom here, this is going to be probably the deepest of color. And you can kind of see when the ink sort of builds up, it almost goes to a black, which is good. So again, you can see I've only used this one color, but the layers of the color get sort of these different depths here. So you can go as light as white right down to almost pure black. So that's why we don't want to go too dark too fast. It's the layering up that's going to give us dimension and depth. Don't ever think anything's, the second you think anything's too precious, it's ruined. Because it should be always evolving. And don't think, oh, that's perfect, I shouldn't touch it. And if you touch it, then you think, oh, I destroyed it. You didn't. You can always do it again. So never look at a piece of work that you're creating and think it's, lack of better terms, I just call it precious. Because it should never be precious. It should be, it's like a journey. I would say if you're starting out and doing this type of project, ink is probably a great way to go because it's so forgiving and you can sort of layer it up. If you're working in acrylics, they're opaque and thick, and you sort of have to have sort of more of a direction of where you're going to go. It's harder to go back with acrylics. But this kind of thing, the building up and taking off and building up and taking off, again, it shouldn't be a thought out thing. It should be a therapeutic thing. To me, this is one of those things you get to shut your brain off and just kind of go. Like I said, having the stimulation of music, having in your headphones can sort of put you in a certain lull mood. And you shouldn't really be thinking about it. All you should be thinking about is like, hills and trees and hills and trees. Don't think about work and what you have to do. Don't think about you got to pick up the kids or you haven't made dinner. You just kind of get lost in it. If you're sort of happy with the depth, like in here, there's sort of a nice sort of depth and sort of layering in here. That's why I'm just going to go back into it now with some really dark with the ink, and that's the full dilution of the ink. So it's that's going to be our deepest color, and then just kind of let that sit for a minute. I kind of think some of these the hills in the background here can kind of pop out a little bit. So you can just really lightly kind of go back in and scrub out some of these trees. So now what I think I'm going to do is there's some areas that I'm happy with and some that I'm not. I find this ridge to be a bit uncomfortable. But towards the bottom here, I'm liking the depth. So we're going to go back in with some of the darkest here And then maybe lighten up some of these areas here, or kind of tidy them up, or fade them out even. I'm kind of thinking in here, it's feeling a bit sort of monotone and sort of muddy. So maybe if we go in with a bit of dark ink, it'll kind of just push it a bit and kind of give it a little bit more depth, like there's something happening back there. And again, it's just sort of the expression of something. So a few little scrubs of dark paint will just all of a sudden push that into the background. So the whole idea and where we're trying to go with this is that we're trying to create that ombre kind of feel where the background here is almost white, and then as we slowly go into the foreground here, it's literally almost black. So that's going to kind of give us some depth. And even within some of these little spots, we can add some darker tones, and that's going to kind of give us some sort of sense of dimension to the piece. Okay, so there we go. I think I'm kind of happy with where this is now. I think we have the levels and the layers, which is kind of nice with the ombre. To me, it kind of looks like some misty kind of hills. We can then get a small brush and in the corner, you can sign it. Perfect. And let's hang it up. So there we go. I hope it inspired you to get up and start painting. Again, you should never really be intimidated. It's just canvas and ink and your own imagination.